Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for Connected, Protected, powered by the Innovation Forum at First Caribbean Bank. In today's session, we're going to learn more about security insights for protecting client information, as well as best practices for clients to mitigate the risks of cyber attacks. I'm your moderator this evening. My name is Trevor Wood. I'm the director responsible for data risk and corporate center technology. And within my portfolio is data governance, as well as certain elements of privacy. I'm going to introduce you to our panel in a bit, but first let's start with housekeeping. As we said just now, our webinar is going to be focused on security insights to help you to protect your information, as well as an overview of best practices in the field of cybersecurity to mitigate the risks of cyber attacks. You should see a Q&A box on your Zoom screen. Please use those to ask any questions you have. Please don't ask any questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring Q&A for questions throughout the session. The recording of the session will be made available within 48 hours after the event. And last but not least, we love feedback. We do want to hear from you, so please let us know what we did in the email survey after the event. All right, and let's warm up the chat a bit. Can you let us know which country you're joining us from? All right, while we get that going, Jamaica, Bahamas, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, TCA. All right, so we have a pretty diverse group of attendees this evening. So thank you all for attending. All right, so let's meet our panel. Starting with Mr. Neil Matthews, Director of End User Technology and Technology Services here at CIBC First Caribbean. Among Neil's portfolio of responsibilities are our Enterprise Service Desk, Change and Incident Management, IT Service Provision, ABM, Support and Strategy, and Comms. Neil is the co-developer of UE's Introduction to Cybersecurity course and is a well-known subject matter expert on development of the cybersecurity and cybercrime course in a collaboration between the Georgian College and the Regional Security System. Outside of work, he collaborates as well in the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology here in Barbados, where he serves as an advisor, and he's a founding member of the Barbados chapter of the ISSA and an officer in the Barbados Defense Force. Also on our panel this evening, we have Mrs. Patricia Roseal. Patricia is our Director for Enterprise Security, Fraud, and Supplier Risk Management. She has extensive experience in internal auditing, technology, banking operations, and change management. Patricia is a volunteer instructor with the Institute of Internal Auditors and facilitates their cybersecurity auditing and fundamentals of IT auditing seminars globally. Patricia, as you can see, is very heavily credentialed and is a former Commonwealth Scholar. Thank you for joining us again as well this evening, Patricia. And our final panelist, David Giddens. So David is an extremely experienced cybersecurity consultant. I won't go through his certifications there, but they're listed. He's held senior positions in InfoSec organizations and is the founding president of the Information System Security Barbados chapter. He also headed the Anti-Fraud Committee of the Barbados Bankers Association, which is the committee responsible for fighting fraud in the local banking and credit union arena. Among David's current roles are Education and Events Director of the ISSA and member of the Cybersecurity Working Group in the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology. So at this point, I'll ask David to say a few words about the ISSA Barbados chapter before we let Neil kick off our presentation. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Trevor. Good evening. The ISSA, Information System Security Association, is an international association for security professionals and practitioners. It's a global organization consisting of various chapters all over the world. I represent the Barbados chapter, and we're about promoting safe security practices in Barbados, as well as developing the profession and the professionals in it. Our membership consists of people from various industries and government, and we cover several areas of cybersecurity. We have forensic specialists, ethical hackers, security managers, risk managers, IT auditors, etc. So I'd like to also thank CIBC First Caribbean for inviting us to speak at this session.
Thanks, David. Over to you, Neil.
All right, thanks, David and Trevor. So the investment industry faces a variety of rapidly evolving cybersecurity threats, including hackers penetrating systems, insiders compromising firms or data for commercial gain, nation states that may acquire information to advance national objectives, and hacktivists whose objectives may be to disrupt and embarrass the organization. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST as we know it for short, defines cybersecurity as the process of protecting information by preventing, detecting, and responding to attacks. Similar to financial and reputational risks, cybersecurity risk affects a company's bottom line. It can drive up costs and impact revenue. It can harm an organization's ability to innovate and to gain and maintain its customers. The International Organization of Standards defines cybersecurity or cyberspace security as the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information in the cyberspace. In turn, cyberspace is defined as the complex environment resulting from the interaction of people, software, and services on the internet by means of technology devices and networks connected to it, which does not exist in any physical form. So, the cyber threat landscape has drastically evolved during the last 40 years. COVID-19 has forced us to adopt digital technologies, making us more susceptible to these types of threats. Cybercrime will be the second most concerning risk for global commerce over the next decade. The average cost of a breach in 2019 was noted to be around $3.92 million. And let's listen to this figure very carefully, $6 trillion. Statistics highlight cybercrime damages could increase immensely by 2021. Now, to put it into context, $6 billion. OPEC was expected to make over $500 billion in oil revenue in 2018. That means that cyber criminals, will destroy almost 12 times the value of OPEC's entire annual oil export revenue, a truly staggering figure. And that economic destruction will be taking place every single year. As a result, understanding the importance of cybersecurity is key to ensure a trusted and secure digital economy, giving confidence to its individuals and businesses. Can we afford to invest in cybersecurity? If and when governments or organizations have a breach, do we have strategic policies and controls in place? What security awareness strategies have been deployed to sensitize public and private entities? Has sufficient due diligence been done? So what are some examples of cybercrime? Invasion of privacy, malicious social engineering, financial theft, cyber espionage, intellectual property violations, and identity theft. To understand the scale of cybercrime, the Equifax breach in the US exposed nearly 150 million people in the US, which is literally half the population of the US. We're gonna put up a little poll here now and ask you to participate. So the question is, has your data ever been compromised? Please note that you can answer, and we'll get back to the responses a little bit further in my presentation.
Hi, Neil. We're going to ask the attendees to answer. We're going to give them 30 seconds to answer while you continue your presentation.
No problem.
All right.
So we need to understand which threats are most likely and most dangerous to our unique situation to effectively develop and implement a cybersecurity strategy. And yes, you as an individual need to have your own cybersecurity strategy. The three main culprits out there in terms of in 2020 was phishing, malware, ransomware, and Internet of Things. And I'll go into a bit on each of them. So what is phishing? Phishing is a method of trying to gather personal information using deceptive emails and websites. What happens is you get an email, and a person or a hacker sends you an email with a link that is not related to a legitimate cause, and you click on that link and it starts a malicious executable attached to the email. And most of the time it's because we're multitasking, so we're quick, we respond fast, and we don't pay attention to what we're doing. But Pat will talk more about the responses to these types of threats. One of the Fortune 500 companies in April 2020, Magellan Health, was attacked. Over 365,000 patient personal identity information was affected. 365,000. That's literally the population of Barbados. Attackers leveraged a phishing scheme to gain access to the system after sending out a phishing email and impersonating their clients before deploying the attack. At the end of the day, humans trust when they shouldn't. So literally seconds before we came on this webinar, I received this from someone internal. And this is actually one of the first of these types of alerts that I've ever seen. Trinidad has issued a threat alert against ransomware attacks. So let's talk about what is malware and ransomware. So malware is a computer program designed to infiltrate and damage computers without the user's consent. Now, honestly, I don't know which user will consent having their computer destroyed, but at the end of the day, that's what it does. Ransomware is a type of malware which encrypts the data and makes it impossible for the user to access the data. But in order to get access to this data, you have to pay a hefty fee. And if there's one item that should hit home, it's this one. With the recent announcement of a regional entity actually being hit by ransomware with an allegedly extremely large significant axe. This should be an eye-opener to the fact that Barbados and the Caribbean are just as visible and can be targeted just like any American or European multinational corporation. In January 2020, foreign currency firm TravelX faced a ransomware attack by a gang, Re-Evil. I'm not going to pronounce the rest of that word. But TravelX was unable to perform financial transactions on their website or through their application. 5 gigabytes of customer data was stolen, and then it was asked to pay $4.6 million as part of the ransom. Because of this attack, numerous events did not take place. Additionally, thousands of employees were laid off, therefore highlighting the real costs of ransomware. What is the Internet of Things? It's, in its simplest terms, the Internet of Things is how we describe the digitally connected universe of everyday physical devices. Alexa, our phone, our tablets, all these devices. You listen to them all day. Your fridge now can order food for you when it runs, when your stock is running short. Our Fitbits, our smartwatch. All of these smart things that we own, they have really they really have good intentions, but there's always that person out there who's trying to make them into something that they shouldn't, making them something wrong. Garmin, and everybody knows Garmin from the Fitbit world or the maps world, right? Garmin, in July 2020, the Russian hacker group Evil Corp were responsible for hacking wearables and apps. The devices were offline for up to 5 days, and the attack encrypted some of Garmin's system. A multi-million-dollar ransom was paid via a third-party company to regain access to the files. So you know how many people were out there with their actual Garmin device trying to find their way to somewhere, and it was actually telling them nothing because the company was down for 5 days. So I guess some people were stuck someplace for 5 days. So let's look at the poll. All right, not too bad. 69% of our audience says their data has never been compromised, while 31% says theirs has. For that 69% who says that it hasn't been compromised, how do you know? I'll pass over to David now.
Thank you, Neil. All right, now I'm going to be dealing with privacy. Privacy is related to security, which Neil would have dealt with, but privacy focuses on protecting human beings. It's about human rights, and it deals with protecting our personal information. So basically, people threaten our privacy, and they do it for several reasons. They want to target us for sale campaigns to sell things to us. They want to influence how we vote. We would have heard of allegations about the US election in 2016, where organizations tried to influence American voters. And it has happened even in the Caribbean, allegedly. They want to use social engineering on us to commit cybercrime, and Neil would have dealt with cybercrime. So they use different types of social engineering to commit some of the crimes Neil would have spoken about. In some cases, they want to discriminate against us based on maybe where we come from, or religion, or race, and certain other factors. Sometimes they merely want to attack our privacy for purposes of fraud. They just want to make money. In some cases, they want to track our movement. They want to see where we go. Again, it is probably nation states or some other people who are behind that. And in some cases, they just want to sell our information to other people for profit. Now, how do they actually do this? Unfortunately, there are many, many methods to compromise our privacy. Sometimes people will collect unnecessary details when we do application forms for jobs. Sometimes the jobs are bogus. We apply for the jobs and never hear anything, but it was really a data collection exercise. Sometimes the popular mobile apps which actually steal information. The apps might do something good, but at the same time, in the background, they're taking information and sending it to some server somewhere that hackers control. There are cases where the electronic devices which listen to our conversations, and again, they send them back to the internet. I mean, sometimes you watch your TV and your TV is watching you too, and you don't even realize. Sometimes people create these hard end user agreements, like when you install a new software, they might give you 10 pages to read through and say you agree. Sometimes they might actually be using that as a way to compromise your privacy. Because in the agreement, they might say, we have the right to blah, blah, blah. That might be on page 10, but they know nobody's gonna read past page 2. So they can use that to compromise your privacy legally. Sometimes malware is used to trick us into taking information, sensitive data, which would relate to privacy. Then there are also bogus surveys. Sometimes you might be on Facebook or other sites, and this interesting survey comes up and you answer it not knowing that it's only a part of collecting the personal data on you. There's some other methods. Social media campaigns, sometimes people develop social media campaigns, and the main aim of the campaign is to get your personal data. And they might do it over a period of time. They might get something from you now and then come back in another way or a different person to get more information. Criminal gangs sometimes will hire hackers to breach an organization looking for a database which contains personal data. A trick that people have used in the past, they would take USB keys and put spyware on it and leave it knocking around, and knowing that human nature is to see something, especially if you think it's free, you pick it up, you stick it on your system, try to see what is in there, and it has malware in there which extracts personal data from you and again sends it over the internet. The thing is, as Neil would have said, with all these smart devices, almost every electronic device now connects to the internet. So it's very easy in stealing information to be able to send it over the internet to a server controlled by a hacker. The government might also collect biometric data from persons when you're coming in. You know, it might be fingerprints or iris scans or whatever, and it might be a foreign government. You might be visiting another country, but they're collecting personal data on you, and you don't necessarily know what they're gonna use it for or where it will end up. And then you get people who use sophisticated software on the internet where they actually mine social media sites. They're actually looking at things that people post, and they have these different algorithms where they can actually extract different pieces of data about different people. At the end of the day, they would have stolen a lot of personal data. Right? So these are several of the ways that people actually compromise our privacy. Now, what can organizations do to actually reduce the risk of the threats of people attacking privacy? Because there are things we can do as individuals, but organizations which hold our data also have certain things they have a certain role, there's certain things they can do, and they have the resources in terms of people and equipment to do things. Now, there's several different things, but normally you would do a combination, the more the better. Starting from the top, you need to set a risk management regime. You have to have risk management instilled in the organization where you look at you analyzing risk, you tracking risk, you're monitoring risk, you're doing an assessment of the different cyber risks in the organization. The next step, which is probably the thing that people do most, is network security. Your basic firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion protection systems to control what comes into the organization that shouldn't. The third one here, this is one of the most important, and we are doing this right now. User education and awareness, making people aware of the sort of things to look out for, the sort of practices to avoid, telling them about using strong passwords, telling them about phishing scams and that sort of thing. That is actually one of the most effective ways of fighting against these people who want to attack our privacy and security. Malware protection is the next one. And Neil would have spoken about the protection of malware and ransomware. A lot of the theft is done via malware. So again, you want to put systems in place to automatically try to detect and if possible, remove malware from the systems. Then we come to removable media controls, and we're just talking about portable, like USB drives, flash drives, those sort of things. That is one way that people steal information from a network. So you want to put control, you can put control that say you're not allowed to write to a flash drive, or you're not even allowed to use a flash drive, or you can only use a flash drive if it's a certain model and encrypted. So those are some of the controls that organizations do. Other things that come across the site, then is secure configuration. We know we'll have operating systems, we'll have applications, we'll have hardware. They'll come with default settings, default passwords, sometimes security is off by default. And you need to make sure that you configure various devices, applications securely to make it hard. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't say that with any certainty, with 100% certainty that you can stop things, but it is to make it difficult. So you want to make sure that you have your systems securely configured to make it difficult for people who want to get in. Home and mobile working. During COVID, we're doing a lot of that now, and a lot of people actually find it's a better way to work. The problem is you're not in the confines of your network. You don't have the IT guy or the security guy there with you. You might not have the office firewall there. You might not have all the special controls. You might not have a secure environment. You might be working in an area where you have access to the area, but your children who have to go on Google Classroom, they have access, and your cleaner has access, and all sorts of people. So there are a lot of risks with working from home. So organizations need policies to help people work from home, as well as certain software to make it harder for people to attack them. Because hackers are seeing mobile workers and home workers as soft targets, right? They might know that maybe you're set, you can't be updating your malware definitions and other things that if you were in an office environment. So hackers are actually trying to come after. So organizations need to make sure that they have the different procedures and policies and other controls to help their people who are working remotely. Monitoring is very, very important. You have all your security equipment, but if there's no one or no device to monitor it, you can be seeing attacks coming in all the time, and nobody's monitoring it. Eventually, some of those attacks may work, and you don't know. Neil would have asked a question at the end of the survey just now, said the 69% of people who said they've never been attacked. How do you know? What we found is that it takes several months to detect if people have breached your system. Sometimes it could be 10, 12, even 15 months before you know. So unless you have proper monitoring in place to see when attacks are coming in, you could be breached and not find out for months after. By then, the hackers would have been living in your system and set back doors and things. And the damage is a lot more if you're not monitoring to catch them. Then there's incident management. Incident management is what do you do when you detect an attack or a breach, where you have specialized people and procedures who know to contain the incident, to stop the damage, so that it doesn't spread too far, they don't do too much damage, they don't do too much, they don't get too much information. In the case of ransomware, you don't want them to hit one branch and then by the time you find out that they've hit like a whole set of branches, and even start from one country and then go in other jurisdictions where your company is. So you want incident management, which would consist of procedures, trained personnel, equipment. The idea is to contain an incident properly so that you limit the damage. Because again, we cannot absolutely guarantee that you can never get hacked, but the thing is, it's what happens when you get hacked. You want to make sure that the damage is minimalized and that you're back to working as soon as possible. And then the last important thing is managing user privileges, making sure that people only have the sort of access that they require, making sure when people move from one department to the next and they don't need as much access, that you actually change it. So it's a matter of having policies and tools in place to make sure that you're managing the actual privileged users, right? So basically, if you can do all of these things, it go a long way towards helping people, helping organizations protect your security and privacy. Now, I would have spoken about procedures and technology in terms of protecting it, but there's the role also for legislation and regulations. That can go a long way in actually helping protect you. Now when you have data protection regulations, and I know in the Caribbean, some countries are now starting them, some have implemented them, some have them in draft. They're in various stages of being ready, but once they're ready, there are certain things that they can do to help protect your privacy. One important thing, they can force organizations to use best practices to protect our data. If you look at GDPR and other data regulations similar to those, you see they mandate that there's certain things you have to do, like you might have to have encryption, you might need certain roles within the organization. There's certain best practices that legislation will force an organization to do. Another thing that regulations do, data protection regulations, they can restrict people in terms of what information that they can collect so that people don't collect unnecessary data. I know in some countries, you might go to certain organizations, you're signing up for a service and they give you a form, they want to know about your grandmother, they want to know about the children you got, they want to know everything about you. And you know that what they're asking for is not required to provide the service that you're asking for. But in the absence of data protection regulation, people can just give you a form and ask you to fill out any and everything, bring in title deeds and all sorts of foolishness. So basically the regulation can stop people from collecting too much data. And it can also speak to things like unethical agreements where people ask you to do things. Again, going back to the end user, there's agreements, it can make sure that you don't do that. And it can make sure that when you write an agreement for a client to sign, that it's written in English instead of legalese, that people actually understand what they're signing, as opposed to people, because they want the service, they can tick the box and say, ready agreement. It can actually force organizations to give you agreements in normal English, Dutch, whatever that you can understand. Another role of legislation is it can force organizations to be transparent of what data it holds about you. So if somebody collect data about you, it can say that, if the person say, I want to know what you hold on me, then you have to do it. And also, like when they collect any data, it can force it to say, this is why I'm asking for all of that. So an organization has to be transparent, as opposed to what we've become accustomed to, where people have our data, we sign up for service, 10 years later, they're still holding data on us. We don't even use the service anymore, and we don't know why they're doing it. And then the last thing they have here that legislation can do, it can force organizations to say when they've been breached. Now, in the Caribbean, we have a problem where a lot of organizations, a lot of jurisdictions do not have mandatory breach reporting requirements. That means that my big company realize hackers gone in and they steal information related to 50,000 of my clients. I'm not required to say anything. I can keep my mouth shut. And unless they deface my website or do something really serious so that I can't deny that there's an incident, I can keep my mouth shut if I'm unethical. So what legislation does in a lot of places, there's a data protection legislation. It will demand that if your organization is breached, you need to, within a certain time, make a declaration to your clients and maybe to some central government authority, so that people will know that there's been a breach and they need to take certain precautions because they may end up being attacked by scammers or they may be subject to identity theft, etc. So thank you for listening to me, and that is my take on protecting your data privacy. Now I'll hand over to Pat, and I'm sure we'll enjoy hers as well. Pat, you're muted.
That's a guaranteed way to stay safe, Pat.
It is indeed. I was just checking to see who was paying attention. David got the prize. We can collect afterwards.
That's a bit too private.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to all, and thanks, David. No, David would have spoken about the things that we can do to protect ourselves and our organizations. There are a number of methodologies and processes, but we would talk now about zero trust. And zero trust is a model that is based on the concept that insiders, that all devices, all users, all transactions have already been compromised. And because that is the underlying notion of zero trust, then the fundamental requirement of the zero trust security model is that every single identity and every single device attempting to connect to the organization network must be verified. And it doesn't matter whether you are inside the known perimeter or whether you're outside, because the underlying principle is that, everything is already being breached or compromised. And the organizations, we will see that and some of the stats that Neil would have given earlier on in discussion, that a lot of organizations have reported that they had breaches that were based on from inside the organization. So it helps to validate the fact that we really can't assume because a person or a device is connecting from within the environment that it is safe, right? So what are some of the objectives and underlying principles around the zero trust security model? It is based on least privilege. So that simply say basically that you're only given sufficient access to system capabilities, system devices, applications, whatever it may be within the organization information assets. You're only given sufficient access to allow you to do the job that you're hired to do. right? So it sort of scale back on the access persons are given, whether you are a partner, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a vendor. And it also applies as well to devices. It's not only a people thing, but it's also the devices that connect into the environment. The other thing that is there as well is we look at it also implements micro segmentation, right? And one of the easiest way to think of micro segmentation is that everything within the environment perimeter is broken down into small subcomponents, and every small subcomponent has its own individual access requirement. So it's not a case where you say once you come into the network, you're in the network and you can traverse the network and do whatever you want to do. No, it's saying that every possible subcomponent that you can define has its own access requirement, and because you got in the network, it doesn't mean that you'll be able to traverse all over. It's like if you walk into, think of it like you walk into a hotel. So you can get into a hotel, you come to the front door, but you have your key, and your key can only open your door. It doesn't matter if the hotel has 500 rooms, you can only go into one room. That is the only room you're allowed to access. So that is a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it helps us to understand what we're trying to achieve with microsegmentation. And that increases the security, because what you will find that, you know, if you look at the anatomy of a breach, a malactor comes into the environment and they try to propagate, they try to move around and collect information. And that is one of the reasons as well why we have least privilege, because if persons have too much privileges on the access principles, if a malactor come into the environment and is able to hijack or overtake somebody's user ID, user credentials, and it is not based on least privilege, then they can propagate all over the network and steal information very easily. And then we try to use single sign-on, especially if we have applications in the cloud. You don't want people trying to try to remember, you know, I have 2 cloud applications, I got 2 different passwords and 2 different user IDs. You try to make sure you have single sign-on. And single sign-on also allows you to apply certain security principles once and for all. You know that once you apply it, it is propagated. It doesn't matter where the person logs on from. If they log on from at home, directly into the cloud, into your applications into the cloud, or if they log on from within the office building and then traverse the local network into the cloud, you know that the principles that are applied are the same, because you're forcing them to use single sign-on, and that allows you to apply a lot of the principles there. And that helps to make sure that your devices are properly connected, properly protected, when they are connected, as well as individuals. So what are some of the things that we have to look at? I think in this new dispensation for security, Neil would have talked about the prevalence of incidents. You would have seen the cost associated with breaches. So it's clear to us that we have to act, because the cost of not acting is tremendous. And therefore, if we have to act, we have to change, we have to have a paradigm shift. We have to change the way that we would have done things before. And we have to start investing in talent. Start investing in talent, yes. If you aren't gonna start, then if you're doing it, you need to do more. If you look around, if you were to look at what number of researchers are saying, you would see that there is a shortage of information security professionals. And the shortage is not like 10,000 people or something like that. It is in the millions. It is close to 1 million. And I mean, when I say close to 1 million, it's over 1 million. Is 1 million plus shortage in security professionals. So we have to invest in talent. The cyber actors, the cyber criminals are invested in talent. They're working very hard to enhance their skill set. So the only way that we can keep up with them is to also invest in talent. And it has to be targeted. It has to be very specific. It is not about sending people on a course here and there. You have to sit down, understand your environment, do a risk assessment. When David was talking, he spoke about the 10 steps, and the first one he mentioned was risk assessment. You need to understand what are the risks, what are the threats to your environment, to your organization, and based on that understanding, you invest in your talent pool. that understanding as well, when you couple that with what are the organization goals. So if you're in a company and they're yet not online and they're planning to go online, then you have to understand that how you spend your money on security, including training, has to be aligned with the company goals. If you have to have an incident plan as well, and your incident plan is aligned to your budget, which is also aligned to the company goals. There's no sense spending money on cloud training or spending money on tools for cloud security if your company is not going into the cloud. Well, I don't know of any company that won't be going into the cloud, but that is just an example. The other thing that you have to do is to make sure that you tell the story, you tell your story so that you can get the support of the board and the executive team. Because without that level of support, it's going to be very hard to develop an information security strategy that allows you to adequately protect your environment and deliver on that if you don't have that level of support. And you might say, well, the board and senior management should understand, but we got to remember that security is very conceptual. Unless you have a breach where you see you have problems with your customers and problems with regulators, it's very hard for some persons who are not conceptual thinkers or who don't see things conceptually to grasp what you're saying. And so you have to make sure that you tell the story. And when you're telling your story for security in terms of trying to get the budget and get the alignment, you always got to start on why is it important? What can happen if we don't do this? And then people will start understanding what it is we're trying to get at. The other thing David would have mentioned a little bit is legislation. And if, depending on the industry you're in, you might be highly regulated. If you're in banking, you're going to be regulated by the central banks. If you're manufacturing, the other regulations that you're going to follow. And so you need to make sure that if there are particular legislation, regulations, or practices that you must follow for your industry, you got to make sure that those things are covered off and are addressed in your cybersecurity priorities and plan that you may have developed. Now let's look at some how can individuals, that was a lot about companies. I mean, the principles apply to individuals. So let's look at individuals protect themselves against cyber threats. Now, most of the cyber threats that are going to come to individuals are going to come through online banking, mobile banking, or some other social media or activities that we would do online. And we will sort of spend some time talking about online banking and banking in general, because most of the cyber threats that come to us as individuals are normally persons trying to steal our information. I mean, we do have people stealing identities as well, but a lot of it is really about stealing information so that they can steal our money, right? So let's look at some things that we use every day: debit and credit card. How do we protect ourselves using debit and credit cards? Now, most EMV, we commonly call it a chip card. It has an embedded microchip, as well as it still also have the magnetic strip. And this chip allows for the encryption of information that is passed whenever there's a transaction using the card, and that increases the level of data security. The way it works simplistically is that there's an encryption algorithm that encrypts the data. Is a one-time stuff. So if you encrypt data at 5 o'clock and then data is encrypted at 5 past 5, it is not going to be the same crypto. It's going to be very different. When it moves from the ABM or the ATM and moves up to the core systems at the back, the algorithms are able to decrypt and read it. So that makes sure that the communication of information is secure and safe. Now, our First Caribbean, we have to go to our First Caribbean cards. You have a PIN, or you can also have contactless, where you can just have to tap your card on a machine that can actually read contact transactions. Now, debit and credit card protection. What are the best things that we can do when we're thinking of protecting our debit and credit card? Now, we talk about a smart chip card. If the card has smart chip, it makes it very difficult to make a fake card to complete a fraudulent transaction. It becomes difficult. However, if the individuals had gotten hold of your card number and the security code, they can still do an online transaction because the card doesn't have to be present for that. But it makes a physical card fake to be very difficult to do. You could also get a radio frequency identification blocker, RFID wallet blocker. So that means that persons aren't able to read the electronic emissions that may come off of the chip. If you have that, no, people might ask, what is that? How do I get one? Don't worry so much about that. You can just line your purse with some aluminum foil, and that should be able to help you with that if you're so worried. Make sure that when you're using your card, you don't let it out of your sight for too long, you know. But I know most of us go to a restaurant, we give our card over to the person who would have served us, and we don't think about it much. But we got to be very careful with that, especially if you're not very familiar with the place that you're at. And always make sure you get your receipt and double check it to make sure that you know what it is that you thought you were paying for is what you paid for, and there's no difference in what you thought you were doing. Okay. ATM fraud. Now, I know many persons would have heard and would have asked about ATM fraud, so we wanted just a little bit here on ATM fraud. The cyber actors have many ways. These we always have to give them the respect because they are very smart people, and they're always a step ahead of the good people like us. And they've developed many ways that they can skim cards. Skimming is just really getting your information off a legitimate card and making a fake card. And sometimes they will attach, sorry, my words are going all messed up today. Sometimes they will attach a device to the ATM. So it makes sense that when you go to ATM that you look at it carefully to make sure that you're not seeing any, sometimes you see like the ATM might have graphics or words on it. Make sure that they all line up, because when an ATM goes in without any interference, all those things will line up properly. Make sure that you use ABMs and ATMs in an area that you're familiar with. You don't want to be using ATMs in an unfamiliar area. Make sure that whilst you're entering your PIN, that if there anybody standing around you, or if somebody would have gone to the ATM and place a camera on there to try to steal information, that you sort of cover your hand so that the actions that you're using for keying in your PIN can't be easily discovered. So that is a little bit about credit card, debit card, and ATM fraud, because we know many persons were always asking about that. So generally, what are some of the things that you can do to protect yourself? Well, you can look at using multi-factor authentication. So in other words, instead of relying on a user ID and a password only, you add another factor onto your authentication process. And these things you can buy online. You can download them from the Google Store or the Play Store. And they allow you to have a sort of a unique identifier each time you try to log on to one of your applications that you were using. And I think they're useful if you are going to be using your device for financial transactions, banking transactions. And if you're using your device for banking transactions, you should probably try to avoid doing banking transactions over public Wi-Fi, right? Because you might not be aware, or you have little control over how that public Wi-Fi is managed, and it might be very easy for somebody to listen to the traffic on that Wi-Fi, or to hijack that traffic. So I would avoid using public Wi-Fi for anything more than just looking at the news. And even then it's a risk, but you got to make sure that you're very cognizant of that. If you have to use public Wi-Fi, you should probably invest in a VPN on your device, whether it's your mobile, your phone, or a tablet or whatever. Try looking for a good VPN that you can use. And not only on if you're going to use public Wi-Fi, but also if you're for your home laptop, home desktop, whatever you may have at home, it is a good idea to invest in a VPN. And most malware offers that you can get online now will come with a VPN. I'm talking about malware tools that you can get online. You should make sure that you have an antivirus protection installed on your machine, and not only have it installed, but make sure that you keep it current, because if it is not current, then it would not recognize certain exploits, and so you can still be hacked although you have a piece of malware. Even when you have even when you have antivirus or anti-malware that is current, there's always 0 day. So just imagine if you had one that wasn't current, where you would be. Now we talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication, but tied with that is passwords. You know, we got to start creating passwords, and people still create passwords like this. You got to start creating password that is your husband's name and add it by the date you got married, or a password as your children or your kids' first name. You got to make sure that you have some very creative, strong, and long passwords. Those are harder to crack. And what we say, don't use familiar things like your husband's name, your children's name, or your date you got married, because a lot of us put a whole heap of stuff about ourselves on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, what have you. And people go through those things and they gather and harvest information about persons, and they put it together, and based on what they put together, they can start building a profile of you. So you want to make sure that you don't make it easier for the cyber criminals to do that. And you should never really share your personal information on social media. Um, you gotta be wary of that, because as I just said, people gather that information, harvest that information, and build profiles about persons doing that. Now, when it comes to, like, Neil would have spoke a little bit about phishing. You know, phishing, a large percentage of phishes come through email. So when you get an email, like, you know, you get an email saying, "Congratulations, you've won." Now, you didn't enter a contest, but you've won, and you go and you start clicking and typing in. Well, you know, and you find that a lot of these phishing emails tend to bear on people's emotions, or sometimes you would say, like, "Oh, you have to do this in a hurry, you know, it must be done within the next 24 hours." So they're trying to attack your emotions and stuff, whether to frighten you or to make you exciting. So be very careful of emails that you did not request or that you are not expecting. Even if you expect an email from somebody, and you got an email, but the character of the email seemed to be a little bit unusual for the person from whom it came, you probably want to do some little investigation. You can toggle your mouse on the email address to see if it really reflects the correct address that you are aware of, or an address that you know, a domain that you know. Likewise, if there's a link, you can also toggle on the link to see if the link as referenced in the email actually is supported by the URL address. Okay. And the other thing that you can do as well is, we talk about that, like, avoid downloading applications from unrecognized third-party app stores. For me, I stick with the noted app stores, you know, the well-known app stores, Google or the Play Store. A lot of those also tells you whether or not because a lot of them now verify um, the applications before they actually load them on the app store. So they go through a number of steps to make sure that the application that they're putting on the store has a good reputation and is not something that's going to steal your information. So don't download these things from any and everywhere. Just go to reputable stores. Likewise, make sure, well, I should say make sure, you can probably use a password manager, and there are a couple out there. They're LastPass, there's KeePass, there's Keeper. And again, some of these are available from app stores. Some of them are free. Some of them have a small cost, and some of them are costly, depending on what you're looking for. So if we were to implement most of these suggestions and tips within our personal space, we would reduce the likelihood that we would be targeted always, but we will reduce the likelihood of being a victim to some measure of social cyber activity, right? So that was talking about how do we protect ourselves, how do we secure our personal information. Now, suppose you did all of that, but you still got breached, and remember I said that normally when individuals get breached, it is normally a case where the perpetrator is looking to steal money. Unless unless we are some sort of connected person where they're looking to steal personal information, normally looking to steal money. And if you think that you have been a victim of fraud, you should report the attack immediately to the company information security group. And what you would find is that most companies would have on their website the contact details that you can use to report any incidents that you may encounter. Contact your financial institution if you think your personal identifiable information (PII) has been breached, and you can ask to speak to their fraud department. That will help. If you see behavior on social media sites that is inappropriate, you should probably, I shouldn't say you should probably, you should report it to the based on the reporting structure that the social media site would have, to make sure that that behavior is checked and put a stop to it before it becomes anything more serious. So I think that we can stop there. Trevor,
Yes.
over to you.
Yes, thank you, Pat. All right, so we're going to do a quick recap and then attend to some of the questions, many questions actually, that we've seen in the Q&A. So what did we learn today? All right, so in Neil's section, we spoke about what cybercrime was. We talked about the ways cybercrime manifests itself, the top cyber threats, as well as their impact. We then looked at the privacy aspect of cybercrime, and I think David did a really good job on that. Also covering why and what it is important for organizations to do. And I think even though we did spend a lot of time on institutions, that's important because a breach of an institution means a breach of your data as long as you're a client of that institution. So it's really, really important to make sure that not only on a personal level, but at organizational levels, that we do have cybersecurity in place. And finally, Pat covered personal tips, especially from a banking perspective, and what to do if you do find yourself breached, in spite of taking whatever precautions were available to you. I think it's notable that even recently, the President of the United States got hacked on Twitter by a researcher in Europe. So you can never be too careful, right? We do have a little time left. I want to attend to some of the questions, and I'll start with you, Neil. Is there any specific reason why we're seeing an increase in ransomware attacks?
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
So I don't think there's a specific reason we're seeing an increase in ransomware attacks. I think for us in the Caribbean, it's just become a bit more visible. With the most recent one with the conglomerate here has sort of highlighted that we can be a target just like anybody. So there's nothing significant about us. Pat can tell you that as a banking institution, literally every day, every minute, there's somebody trying to get in to our systems, and we're doing our utmost best to make sure that they're doing. So there's no specific reason. Ironically, with the recent hack of that company, it was noted that I think I highlighted to somebody that only the week before, that company had made a significant change in management and highlighted about how profitable they were and that type of stuff. So I think it was probably just somebody going to show, hey, we can get you. But in a hack, that was not something that happened that day or that week, as both David and Pat would have highlighted in terms of their presentations. These things take time, to get into an organization and move around and check the data and be able to exfiltrate the data. It's not a one-day process. So this was probably something in the making a while before, but the sort of announcement of the plans and the profits and that sort of stuff was the opportunity to say, yeah, we are positively sure that you got money this time. So when we asked you to pay, you just said last week we made profit, right?
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that, Neil. David, I have an interesting question for you, and it is about privacy legislation in the Caribbean. I guess my first question would be, can you give us an overview of the countries which have enacted privacy legislation and how you see that developing in the next couple of years?
I would have seen information recently to suggest that most of the Caribbean countries are working on it. There are one or two, I think, that may have enacted it, but most of them, I think, are still in the stage of work. Now, I can't remember the particular names to tell you, since this or since that have it, but the majority don't have it in place yet, but most are working on it.
Okay. And what do you think the implications would be for organizations like First Caribbean who operate in several jurisdictions?
Well, I mean, if for a company that has its security in place, I don't think you need to fear that sort of legislation. If you really have your stuff in place, you would already have incident management in place. You'd already have the peer in place. You would know what happened if you were breached. You would know the sort of thing to say to the public. You would have your people trained. You'd have all your scripts of what to do in case you're hit. You'd have your procedures. Your technical people would know if you get hit this way, we do A, B, C, D things. So for organizations that have their security in place, I don't think there's anything to fear, right? Especially organizations that are like publicly traded organizations that are already fairly transparent. You know, they publish their reports, and those don't have a lot of fear. The organizations which don't really tell anyone anything that might not be well regulated, those are the ones who I think have the most to fear by the legislation. Because for one thing, they may not have the procedures in place, the structures in place. They may no need to go and start hiring certain roles, putting certain technologies in place. So it's the people who don't have a high security maturity level who I think would suffer most in terms of having to deal with the legislation once it's put in place.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that, David. We have a question here from Jackie that I think Pat should be able to help us with. So Pat, you spoke about the measures that people can take to protect their information. Jackie's asking, what is a password manager, and could you provide an example?
Okay. A password manager is a tool, a software tool that allows you to store all of your password for all the systems that you use. So it stores the user ID and password for all systems that you use. Now, well, we call it a vault, a password manager, password vault. Well, once your password are stored by this software, it is normally encrypted. So even if somebody were to get access to your password manager, what they would see in there will look like garbage to them. Garble, it'll be all, you know, they won't be able to understand what it is. It'll be all garbled up and stuff like that because it's encrypted. And you use that so that when you're trying to connect to anything, whether it's a system on within your network or something in the cloud, you would just go into your password manager, and it would depend on the type of password manager you have. It might give you the password to type in, or if it is a very good password manager, it will connect automatically to the system that you're trying to enter, and it will put in the password and it goes on. So you never have to know what the passwords are, right? You only have to remember one password, and that is the password to get into the password manager or the password vault. The personal password managers, there is McAfee has one that's just called McAfee Safe. There was one that we mentioned in the presentation, KeyPass, a password keeper. From a corporate sort of organizational lens, there's one where there's a password vault by a company called CyberArk. But there, if you were to go into Google and type in password manager, password vault, you would see a whole list of possible examples. And there's some that are specifically for individuals, and then some that are corporate grade.
Okay. All right. We're running.
Before you continue, just make sure that the password for your password vault is a good password. Eh? Don't put a password one.
Yes. Correct, Neil. Thank you.
That gives people the keys to the ball, right? All right, I know
Yes.
we're running over time, so I'm going to ask, but I do want to make sure that we answer the questions that were posed by the attendees. So I'm going to ask each of you one further question. And Pat, I'll start with you again. We had a terrific question from Anne, and I know you touched on it, but Anne wants to know how you can tell that an app is one that wants to steal your information.
That is a $1 billion question, you know. It is very difficult to tell, but there's some things that you tend to protect yourself against. You're not going to get an app from any and everywhere. You should only be getting apps from reputable stores, whether it's on the Apple Store or the Android Store. You know, reputable store you should only be getting apps from. So in other words, don't get a link from Also Ran and that has an app and you download that app, right? You should really be getting it from a store. Even when you get apps from the store, you know, you get an app, let's say you get an app to play a game. I saw this recently. You got an app to play a game and it wants to get access to your camera. It want to get access to your documents. It want to get access to all these things. Well, chances are, what do they need access to all those things? So you go and look at the access requests that a number of applications make. If it is not in keeping with what you're using the application for, then you should not take it. The other thing that you can probably do in terms of trying to understand if an app is trying to steal your information, whether you are on a mobile device or whether you're on a laptop or desktop, if you have implemented, installed, you know, obtained or installed some sort of security software, you can check to see if they are unusually large traffic to certain sites. And you can say to your system, you know, you block, if you find that the size of traffic increasing to a particular site over X size, then you can block that. And a lot of, there are lots of, what is the word? There are lots of security tools that are made for individual use that allow you to do that and will help guard you against applications and stealing your information from your phone or from your tablet, whatever. From an organizational perspective now, there are many tools that are implemented within the organization that monitors traffic flow, that restrict traffic flow. So there's some traffic flows that just can't happen because you have to come through the firewall, and the firewall has certain rules set up, and based on where you are and where you're going, the traffic would never flow. And we also have tools that uses a measure of artificial intelligence and some machine learning that will look for anomalous behavior. And if the behavior doesn't fall within a particular pattern, then it will suggest that somebody is trying to do something that is not within our normal expectations. And then you will put a halt or you will ring fence that sort of activity. So I hope, Anne, that helps you, but it's a very difficult thing to do, but there are tools out there that we can employ.
Okay. All right, well, thanks a lot for that, Pat. David, back to you again. There's a question here from an anonymous attendee. How difficult, or is it actually difficult, to monitor cyber fraud in countries with privacy laws?
First of all, I hope that is not anonymous and it's just an anonymous attendee.
Go, David.
It is an anonymous attendee, not an attendee from Anonymous.
Oh, okay, cool. So they want to know how you monitor fraud without that, without the legislation there to help you?
Yeah, I think the question, if I had to summarize it, would be, what are the implications of privacy laws on the ability to monitor cyber fraud?
Well, I would say the laws go a long way. One thing, some laws are actually exempt government. So it focuses mainly on the private sector. So it's easy to once the laws are in place, it's easy to monitor the level of fraud within the private sector. Sometimes you have association, like say a banking association, they might do their own statistics. So you will be able to measure fraud that way. Then also in terms of the authorities, sometimes the police will also or whatever police unit you have in there, they have their own statistics. So it helps when there are privacy laws in the jurisdiction. If there are no privacy laws, you have to, depending on associations, like banking associations, financial associations, or to see if the police have that capability to track it. I remember, or within Barbados, so that's one of the things that within the bankers thing that we worked on, because one of the things we found that there wasn't any association focusing on all the type of fraud that we were looking at, where someone was saying, okay, I'm going to keep track of all the statistics in terms of the banking fraud. But I would say, yes, it is preferable to have the legislation in the jurisdiction, but in the absence, there's still ways, depending on what different associations are doing, of monitoring the fraud.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for that, David. And final question to you, Neil. So we do have quite a few other questions happening, but I think this one is interesting given some of the work you've been doing. Do you think cybersecurity should be made a national security strategy? And if so, why?
That is a wonderful question. I am surprised Anonymous didn't ask that question.
I didn't say who asked it, so for all intents and
I just say I'm surprised.
purposes.
It has to be. At the end of the day, the first thing we have to recognize is that as a country, we have to protect our data ourselves. There's nobody else that's going to do it for us. And who's the person in your country that's responsible for making legislation, putting all those boundaries in place? It's the government, right? So we have to protect our own data. Nobody's going to do it for us. Realistically, we have to make sure that, as when Pat talked about protecting personal data, and David talked about his stuff, the responsibility lies with first the individual, but collectively, because government, I think, is probably the largest holder of most data on anything in any country. When it comes to health records, when it comes to license and authority, tax information, financial information, government holds that. So I think they're the key people in terms of having a strategy and making sure that a coordinated effort is made to secure and protect that data. They're also responsible for any organizations coming in to the countries, whether it be an offshore company, whatever businesses. So they have to take responsibility for what's going on in the country. So I think at the end of the day, the country has to be responsible for its own data. But what we said today, and I hope it resonates with everybody, you too have to play your part and be responsible for your personal data.
Yeah, agreed, Neil. And I would say you especially, not just you two, are responsible for your data. A few years ago, there was a saying that data is the new oil, but in the industry, what people are saying is data is the new air. It's become that important. Exactly. All right. We're at time. Thank you so much to everybody who attended. I hope it was informative. We are going to ask you, please give us feedback, send us questions. There will be a survey that will be disseminated to the participants, to the attendees after, and we will make the recording available. Special thanks once again to Neil Matthews, to Patricia, and to our special guest, Mr. David Giddens. With that, take care until next time. This has been Connected, Protected, powered by the Innovation Forum at CIBC First Caribbean Bank. Stay safe, everybody.
Okay.